If you haven't heard yet, I just launched Future of Work Leaders, a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you are interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Again, that is futureofworkleaders.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today is Frederik Pferdt, author of What's Next is Now, How to Live Future Ready. And he's also Google's first Chief Innovation Evangelist. And right away, you'll probably notice that his title of the book has Future Ready. Those of you watching, I have a Future Ready shirt on. Title of the podcast, Future Ready. So we're already very much aligned on topics and themes. Frederik, thank you so much for joining me.
I love that. Yes, Jacob. Thanks for having me. And let's dive into Future Ready. I think that's a spirit motto for you, right? And for the podcast and the work that you're doing. And it has been a spirit motto for me as well. So super excited to learn from you and explore this together.
So when you say Future Ready, like what does that mean for you? And I know you have your 6 dimensions we'll get into in a little bit, but just from a high level concept, Future Ready means what?
Yeah, for me, the future isn't something we stumble upon, right? It's something we shape, starting with how we think about it. And so it really begins in our mind state, what I would say. The perspective we hold at any given moment that really defines how we experience the present. And so the question I would ask you is, how do you currently think about the future, right? Does it excite you, or does it feel uncertain or overwhelming? Or what emotion does it actually trigger?
For me personally, excitement. In general, I try to be optimistic. So I am very, very excited about the future. I don't have fears and worries about AI or technology or the end of the world like so many other people out there do. I'm excited every day when I wake up. In fact, during the holidays, I'm actually a little sad because work slows down. I love Mondays. I love waking up on Monday, kind of tackling the day. And my wife's the same. She does what I do, but focuses on customer experience. And we both love work. We love Mondays. We're both very optimistic about the future.
Amazing. And what that tells me is that, Jacob, you and your wife and probably many people, right, when they're excited about the future, they really feel that they have control over their future, right? And so what if I told you that you can transform how you feel about the future by just shifting how you approach it, right? How you think about it. Not with answers, but with curiosity and with action, right? So as you described, like on your Mondays or and when you're engaged in work, right? That really excites you because you can then literally shape the future that you want to see happening. And I think that's fascinating. And for me, future-ready leaders don't predict the future, right? They create it. And so the best leaders I've seen aren't fixated on certainty, but really are energized by possibility, right? What is possible out in my future and what's possible tomorrow? And I think that is something that we all can learn by literally shifting how we approach the future and how we think about it.
So it kind of makes me wonder if, because to your point, there are some people who are very, like me, optimistic and excited about the future. There are others who are very pessimistic and scared about the future, whether it's business or politics or whatever else you want to kind of include in that mix. Is it fair to say then that those who feel a sense of agency and control tend to be more optimistic, and those who feel like the future just happens to them tend to be more pessimistic?
I think that, I could agree with that, right? Because that's really how you maybe also try to look at uncertainty, right? Uncertainty is something that comes with the future, right? That's by definition, the future is uncertain. But looking at it as something where you say uncertainty isn't a barrier, it's an invitation, right? And using radical optimism, for example, as an approach to that uncertainty, where radical optimism really means believing not just things will get better, but that we have the power to make them better, right? And
Mm.
so you're talking about, right, politics and society or our employer or our partner, all of those have influence on our future, right? But ask yourself, how much can you actually control, right? Politics, society, your employer,
Yep.
or your partner, and how they influence your future, right? What you can control is how you respond in most of these situations when something is happening to you, right? And for me, that really came to life when we had the California wildfires here a while
Mm-hmm.
back, right?
Yep.
Where we really faced a big threat, right? Because the wildfires were burning like a mile away from our house, and we didn't know if they will destroy everything that we've built. And so during the evacuation that we had to undergo, instead of feeling stuck, my family and I used it as an opportunity to reimagine how we live. Right? We began afterwards growing our own food and now using solar energy and collecting rainwater, not just because we had to, but because we
Yeah.
could. And this is really how you can choose to respond in, situations that are out of your control, because we couldn't stop the wildfires,
Yep.
obviously. And sometimes you just have to realize that some things you just can't control and influence, but you always can control how you respond in these situations.
Yeah, it reminds me of a Viktor Frankl quote. He wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, and he had this great quote. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is your power to choose the response that you have. And in that response, that's where your growth comes from and your freedom comes from. So between stimulus and response, you get that space, and the response that you choose is really kind of the power and the freedom that you get. And I think a lot of this is also very applicable in the workplace too, because there are a lot of people who have full-time jobs that might say, well, Frederick, Jacob, I have a boss who sets my schedule. I have to be at work from 9 to 5 or whatever it might be. I don't have the freedom and flexibility that you have. And I was in that situation as well. I used to have a full-time job for many, many years. But even in that situation, there are still certain aspects that you can control. Right. I mean, so focusing on what you can control, I think, is a very, very important element. I could control how I showed up every day. I could control the quality of work that I produced. I could control questions that I asked, feedback that I wanted to get. If I wanted to learn and grow, I had the opportunity to kind of shape that, get time with my leaders and managers so I could learn new skills. So there was a lot that I could control. Could I control the traffic going to work in downtown LA? No. Could I control that I needed to be there every day in the office, that I needed to get dressed and make myself presentable? No. But the aspects that I could control did make a big difference. And so I think that's a very, very important message on focusing on the things that you can control.
Absolutely. And I love how you describe that, because the two words are very important that you used. And on the one hand side, we are reacting, right? We have those immediate reactions to situations, right? Sometimes we get angry, or sometimes we feel impatience, or all of those things, right? But you chose a word that is response, right? That is different from reacting. Response has an element of, I think, wisdom in it, right? And it has something where we pause for a moment and think about how we want to show up, as you described, right? And the traffic example is such a powerful one, right? Like, how often do we sit in traffic? And even when we are on a train or on a plane, right, we sometimes react in situations not probably in the best way, because, sometimes there's people that are on their phone, or they're loud, or they leave the trash behind, or whatever it is. And how do we react in those situations? We mostly react with anger, or we tell people what to do or what not to do, and so forth. But there could be a better response, right? That we maybe don't focus on the things that might be annoying to us, right? But focus on the things that we appreciate, right? So
Yeah.
how often do we actually call out people for picking up the trash, or being respectful, or opening the door for someone, or giving their seat away for an elderly person, or whatever it is, right? That's the things we should focus on and call those things out, instead of like always calling the things out that are maybe annoying to us. And I think that's a better way of also creating an environment where kindness and support And even love is showing up, and that could be something that also shows up in the workplace, as you described, right? Like when we say it's out of our control that we have to show up for work or whatever it is, it's still in our control what kind of quality of work we're producing, how we communicate with our colleagues and our leaders and so forth, right? That's all in our control. And I think that's really important to ask yourself also that question, how do I want to be in my future, instead of like, what do I want to accomplish, right? Many of us really focus on that question, what do I want to have in the future in terms of materialistic things or
Yeah.
a job promotion or whatever it is, right? I don't think that's a good question, because most of these things are out of our control. But what we really can control is how we want to be in the future, right? Do we want to be more curious or more empathetic as a leader? Or do we want to be more open to new ideas and perspectives? I think those are really in our control. And that's what's fascinating to me, that we can also focus on those in our everyday lives.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. So I'm curious, when you were at Google, what years were you there?
So, yes, I started in 2010,
Okay.
and I was at Google for 12 and a half years. I
Wow.
started in Dublin, actually, in the European headquarters, and really built out a community of incredible people that were all passionate about innovation, right? And looking at innovation as something that is really driven by your mind state, right? The way you think about the future, looking for opportunities, right? Experimenting your way forward, being open to new ideas and give them a try and so forth. So that's what I really focused on in my early days at Google, and then grew that community and moved to California 2.5 years later.
Very cool. So I'm curious, when you were there at Google, what was it like? Right. I mean, I grew up, well, not grew up, but I spent a lot of my adult working life in the Bay Area. I actually moved back to LA three years ago and some change, but I spent, around 10 to 15 years or so living in the Bay Area. And, Google was always thought of as this, the epitome of a company as far as the perks, the benefits, the innovation, the 20% time. Everybody always used to look at Google as like the place you want to work at. Even I remember when I was in college at UC Santa Cruz, everybody talking about wanting to get a job at Google. It was like this cool place. What was it actually like to work there? And obviously you were the innovation evangelist. So what was your responsibility? How did you drive that innovation? Because again, everybody looks at Google as kind of this pinnacle of creativity and innovation. What was the secret there that made it all work?
Yes, and thanks for that question. I think most of the people think that the secret is somehow in, the buildings, the environment, the perks,
Free
all of
food.
those things, that the free food, right? The air that people are breathing, whatever it is, right? That's what people read about, right? So I was really curious, starting 2010 in that organization, to really find out what is the secret actually that helps people to come up with these revolutionary ideas and then build products that really touch a billion people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I went actually um, on a trip. It was like 27 offices in 1.5 years that I visited, talking
Wow.
to thousands and thousands of employees. And back then it was probably like 35,000 employees. So decent size of an organization. And I tried to really find out what's that secret that really helps people to tap into their creativity and innovate, right? Incredibly. And I didn't find what people were actually reading about, right? I didn't find that it's a specific environment that people were in, right? That everybody believed in, like, oh, needs to be playful. There needs to be a foosball table and like, or a ping pong table and whatever it is, and needs to have free food. That was not the case. The second thing that I didn't find was people were not following like a specific approach, right, or a framework or something like that. And thirdly, it was not that people had access to a lot of resources, right? It was not the teams that had, the most amount of time to spend on like, coming up with these ideas, or even like resources like money and so forth. But what I found is that every person I talked to and every person I was able to work with had really what I call a future-ready mind state, right?
Hmm.
They had an outlook on the future that really was defined by optimism, openness, curiosity, a sense of experimentation and empathy. Those were for me the 5 key ingredients that are really or deeply human qualities that I found in every single person that allowed them to really innovate. And the good news is that we all have those deeply human qualities in ourselves, right? The maybe even better news is that we can train ourselves to be even more optimistic or open or curious, right? We can practice these things on a daily basis so that we can all literally create the future that we want to see happening. And so what I've done then is I really trained people across the organization. And I think now Google is at about 180,000 people. So that was quite a big endeavor. But I found an incredible community that really helped me to train people in that future-ready mind state to really help everyone in the organization to innovate.
Hmm.
And so what I want to do now is give that to everyone, right? Really help people to tap into what I've learned about innovation, about the future and creativity, so that everybody can do that individually now moving forward. And I share in the book 14 stories of people that I've been able to work with and train and coach over the years. And those stories are just very inspirational because it's human beings that really not just build incredible products, but they build incredible futures for themselves, right?
Hmm.
And by doing so, really showing up with kindness and openness and curiosity in ways that really is inspirational for, I hope, everyone.
All right. So before we jump into these 6 dimensions, I know innovation is obviously a kind of a core aspect of this, but I thought it would make sense for us to break up the difference between an idea, an invention, and an innovation. And so the way that I think about this, and I think I even gave a talk on this maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, and it kind of still stuck with me. So correct me if I'm wrong, but here's at least how I kind of visualize this. An idea is really just a mental concept of something, right? We all have tons of ideas all the time, for products, for services, for cool things that we want to do. Everyone has ideas. Some people are able to take those ideas and turn them into an invention. And an invention is really the creation of an idea, whether it's a product or a service or whatever else it might be. And then from there, even fewer people are able to take that invention and turn it into an innovation, which I usually think of as the implementation of an invention that actually yields some sort of a positive outcome, an improvement. Would you say that's kind of a fair way to break those 3 components down?
Absolutely, yeah. I love how you break that down. And for me, the most interesting question comes to mind, which is, how can we help people to have better ideas, right? Create, more inventions, and then, innovate that really allows us to see the benefits of those innovations for humankind, right, and the planet and so forth. And when you think about ideas, right, we have probably around 35,000 thoughts or ideas per
Yeah.
day, right? So we're not lacking of ideas, that's for sure. And when organizations call me or email me and say like, hey, Frederik, we need more innovation in our organization, right? Most people start with like, oh, we need more ideas, right? And
Yep.
then I look at the organization and then they show me their idea boards that they have online or even as a whiteboard and say like, oh, everybody has ideas and everybody shares great ideas and so forth. And then I say like, great, but what are you going to do with those ideas? And then some organizations respond and say like, oh, we have competitions, right, about the best
Yep.
ideas. And I think that's where it really breaks down and where people make a lot of mistakes in organizations, having a competition about ideas, because that's not really the the best way to find the invention or the innovation. The best way to find what idea might be worth pursuing is experimentation, right? You need to
Yeah.
give people permission to experiment with ideas, to try them out so that they can turn those into inventions and eventually into innovation. So I think the experimentation part is a really critical one here.
I was actually just looking to see, I remember this was a very big trend, right? Companies used to have these, I don't even know what the technical name for them was, but they used to have these kind of like, to your point, idea boards where employees could submit ideas or customers could submit ideas, and then they would get voted on by the company. And then the most popular ones would get implemented. And I was actually just looking right now as you were speaking to see if Starbucks still had theirs. And Starbucks used to have a website, which some people might remember, called My Starbucks Ideas or mystarbucksidea.com. And customers could go there and recommend ideas for products or services or stuff like that. Customers would vote on them. And then Starbucks would be very transparent. They would implement these ideas and they would show the customers where they were in that kind of life cycle. If an idea didn't get implemented, they would explain why. And the site's not up anymore, so it looks like they killed it. But Starbucks is actually having quite a bit of trouble now, so maybe they should bring it back. But I remember lots of organizations used to do that, these kind of like innovation leaderboards. Did that just kind of die off because you don't hear about that anymore? Nobody talks about that anymore. What replaced that?
Yes, it's a great observation. And so, going back 2010, 2011, when I started at Google, right? Many people, started off with that idea, oh, we should have an idea board, right? But most people in the organization responded like, oh, yeah, an idea board is where ideas die, right? Because exactly what happens is that, people submit ideas and then imagine, Jacob, you submitted your best idea, right? You think this is going to be a game changer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then this idea is not going to be picked, right? Another idea is going to be picked. What are you going to do the next week, right? You probably submit like another idea, and then like the third week you submit another idea, but then you're slowly feeling like my ideas are never going to be picked, right? So
Yeah.
I basically not submit any ideas anymore, right? And then worse things is that with the ideas that are going to be picked, right? And I don't know what rubric people are using, right? Because it's just a bet that you're making. So you can go to the casino as well and look at the ideas and say, okay, this sounds like an interesting idea or whatever it is. But then what mostly happens is like people pick an idea in an organization and then they just, don't support it, right?
Yep.
In ways that gives people freedom to experiment with that idea. They don't support it with training to help people to actually build the idea or build prototypes and so forth. So it's really like the worst thing that can happen in an organization is to create an idea board, because that's exactly how innovation actually dies. Another way to approach that is by allowing people to experiment, right? And one of the greatest barriers maybe to shaping the future is waiting for perfect conditions, right? And most of us, we're waiting, and say like, oh, we need to wait for the government to have like the right conditions for my idea to turn that into a startup, or I'll wait for a great check from the, from somebody who supports my idea to get that off the ground. But the truth is, perfection doesn't exist. Progress does.
Yeah.
And so an example I use is gardening, right? When I started gardening, not every plant thrived, but every failure taught me something new. And leadership is the same. You grow through experimentation. You need to try to plant some seeds, and then you need to experiment and see what is growing and what is not growing, right? And that's, I think, how you can set the perfect conditions in an organization, is through allowing people to experiment and create their own garden, because that will lead to some great learnings, and basically that will support innovation as well.
All right, so let's unpack these 6 dimensions. You alluded to them earlier, and maybe we could spend a couple minutes on each one. So we have radical optimism, unreserved openness, compulsive curiosity, perpetual experimentation, expansive empathy, and then dimension X. So let's start off with radical optimism. because for some people, optimism comes a little bit more naturally than for others. Some people, I mentioned my dad a lot on this podcast.
Okay.
He falls a little bit more into the I wouldn't say radical optimism. He's always more on the things could go wrong side of things, and there are a lot of people like that. So why is radical optimism? Well, first, what is it? Why is it so important when we think about this idea of being future ready? And then, do you have any tips for how to practice radical optimism?
Yes. And there is a difference between optimism and radical optimism, right? So, for me, radical optimism isn't passive, right? Like things will work out, right? That's a passive approach to the future. It's active, saying I can make things better right now.
Okay.
And it's a simple shift in language that can really change everything. So maybe that's something that you can practice with your dad. It's a simple practice that I love to do with people, where we replace but with and to keep possibilities alive. And so an example is when we say, I love this idea, but I don't know how to make it happen. Right? That's usually how we respond in an organization to a new idea. You can replace that but with an and, where you say, I love this idea and we'll figure out how to make it happen, right? That's a totally different approach and shift in language that really allows you to not just say, stop, we're done here, we don't know how to make it happen. You're basically opening the door to say, we'll figure it out, how to make that idea happen, right? And that's something that you can practice maybe for the next couple of days, where you replace every but with an and in the conversations, and just track your most powerful and moments, because those and moments are always the stepping stone to something new, to something that is a possibility. And so that's really radical optimism, where we love to use the metaphor that you've probably heard 1,000 of times with the glass half full and glass half empty, right? Where we say, you're the glass half empty person, you're a pessimist, or you're the glass half full person, you're an optimist. And I say a radical optimist is not somebody who sees the glass half full, but who sees the potential to fill the glass even further. So they're looking for the better in every situation, right?
Yeah.
They're looking for, how can I make things better? And that's radical optimism in action.
All right. So I'm guessing you don't, you're not a fan of Andy Grove's quote, "Only the paranoid survive." He was one of the creators of Intel. When did he write this book? Was it in the 80s he wrote this, or the late 1999? He wrote a book called "Only the Paranoid Survive: How to Exploit the Crisis Points That Challenge Every Company." So is that way of thinking, do you think it's still relevant? Because he was a big fan of, prepare, always be paranoid. People are coming for you. You gotta, but innovation was a big part of that. So would you say that mantra is maybe less relevant in today's world, or more relevant in today's world?
Our minds always go to the extremes, right?
Yeah.
We always go to, what's the worst thing that can happen, right, in my future? Or what's the best thing that can happen, right? And I think when we go for paranoia, and when we go for what's the worst thing that can happen, right, it really prevents us to take action, right? We mostly just want to stay where we are, or even worse, we want to go back into the past, right? Because that feels certain, that feels like, oh, that feels familiar, and so forth. So I like to say that we should approach the future with radical optimism, right? That we say we can make things better, and we look for the potential to make things better. And that is, for me, a great way to live your life, because that really is not allowing your brain to always go to, or your mind to go to, the worst case scenario, right? Which basically creates anxiety, it creates fear, and it basically tells you, just stay where you are, don't move, right? Don't do anything. I think it's the opposite that we need to make happen. We need to look into the future and saying, what do we want to create? What do we want to see happening? And what's the best that can actually happen in my future?
Okay. And how do we practice radical optimism? So, for either any individuals or any leaders out there who are wanting to instill this amongst their team, any tips or steps that you can give people to make it a reality?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think that shift in language is very important here, right? Because as a leader, you're communicating a lot, right? And you're communicating how supportive are you of new ideas, right? And so if you change your buts with ands and just trying to build on ideas that you hear from your team, I think you're off to a great start to become a radically optimistic person, because that really signals to your team that you see possibilities, you see a better future that's possible, and you're not like the person who says like this is not going to work because, and give all the arguments why an idea would actually turn out to not be possible. But you allow the people to see an opportunity in your idea or in the idea they are sharing. So just track for the next couple of days how many buts you can replace with ands.
What do Tractor Supply, Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, Dow, Lego, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of other companies all have in common? They are all a part of the Future of Work Leaders community. This is a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you're interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. But how do you filter that? Because let's say you're on a team and you have, 10 or 20 employees. Your employees are coming to you with ideas all the time. If you give everybody an and, all of a sudden it becomes very challenging, right? Because now you're funding lots of things, employees are working on lots of things. It becomes very hard to keep track of things. Maybe not every idea is a good idea. Is there any kind of filter process for what you say yes and to, or do you just say yes and to everything that comes your way?
So imagine you're sitting in your office as a leader in the organization, right? And somebody knocks on your door with an idea that they want to share with you, right?
Okay.
You invite the person into your office, you sit down or you stand at a whiteboard or whatever it is, and the person shares the idea with you, right? The first thing that happens in your mind is you immediately go through a checklist of things that might kill this idea, right? So as a leader, you're saying like, yeah, sounds like a good idea, but we don't have any resources, but it's not part of our strategy.
Yep.
Who should work on that? The list is very long that you usually tell the person regarding to that new idea. If you change that around, because what happens now is fascinating, right? The person that shared the idea took all their courage, right? Showed up in your office with that new idea that could potentially change everything. You just killed that idea with your language, because you had all the buts, all the reasons why this idea would not work out. What happens is then the person leaves your office, right? Tells everyone, don't go in there. Ideas will die in that office, right? That's not what you want to have in your organization, because you can respond differently. When the person comes into your office, you can sit down and you can yes and all the things that is good about this idea, right? You can make this idea bigger, better. You challenge the person to think about how to build that as quickly as possible and so forth. Because what happens then is that person leaves your office and tells everyone, hey, in this office, ideas will grow. That leader will help you to make your idea better, faster, more world-changing and so forth. That's exactly what you want to signal as a leader. So I haven't said that was you what that said, oh, we need to then fund all these ideas, we need to have the resources and the time and so forth when we say yes to every idea. I haven't said that. What you can do is, as soon as that person gets up and you yes and all the ideas, you tell them, come back in 30 days when you've tried this idea and tell me what has worked and what has not worked about your idea. Because what you allow them to do, and that gets us back to the earlier point, is you allow people to experiment with ideas, right? You allow them to learn as fast as possible what works, what doesn't work. So they come back into your office after 30 days, and you hear from the knock on your door, like what happened, right? So they come into your office, and then you sit down, and then they say like, oh, this idea didn't work out. And you ask, why, right? And then they share like, oh, I've learned that blah, blah, blah. And you congratulate them and say, like, thank you for trying this idea and share all the things that you've learned with me. The other option is the person comes back, knocks on your door, sits down with you. They share what they've learned about this idea that actually worked out. And you say again, like, why did it work out? And you congratulate them again and say, or as well, and say like, hey, fantastic. Thanks for trying this idea. Now we can fund it and we can put some resources behind it and so forth. In both scenarios, if the idea failed or if the idea worked out, you as a leader need to congratulate them and say like, thank you for experimenting with this idea.
Yeah.
Because that allows us as an organization to learn as quickly as possible. And nobody knows in the beginning if an idea will turn out or not.
Okay. So it's essentially giving employees permission to take an idea, to run with it, and to see what happens, which is different than kind of just killing the idea upon arrival.
Yes, and there is a yes and here. Giving permission is great. What you want to get towards is eventually that people don't ask for permission. They're just going to try
They
it.
can just do it, yeah.
That's what you want to get towards, because giving permission slips is something that is, that can be helpful. But if you have a team that really takes every idea they think about and experiments with it quickly and tries it out, that's exactly the team you want to build. Because then you see that they don't ask for permission, but they ask for forgiveness afterwards.
Yeah, I was just going to say that quote too. Ask for forgiveness instead of for permission. Okay, let's go to the second one, which is unreserved openness. So same thing there. What exactly is unreserved openness and why is that so important? And any tips on how to practice that?
Yes. So for me, regular openness says I'll try new things when I feel ready, right? But for me, unreserved openness is something that's saying not knowing is the most exciting place to be. So it's really about this notion around stepping through the first door. And openness isn't about being fearless, right? That's not what I say. It's about being curious enough to move forward anyway.
Yeah.
And we all walk around in our lives with those doors that we can potentially open, right? But how many doors do we really open on a daily basis? I don't think that was many,
Not many.
right? Because we're always afraid that like, oh, there might be something, that we find behind that door that doesn't fit into our way of thinking. It doesn't fit into our approach. It doesn't fit into anything, right? But I feel the opposite. I feel like we need to literally open every door and step through it, because behind every door there is a new opportunity. And so that's really for me about being unreserved open, is to open as many doors as possible. And there's a great practice that everybody can try is for the next couple of days, walk through what I call one first door daily. So take a new route to work, or try an unfamiliar food, or start a conversation with someone new, and just track what you discover, right? All of those small things will lead to an opportunity. And those are the first doors that we should open more.
Yeah, and I like that they're so simple, right? I mean, you're talking about very basic things here. You're not talking about like, going skydiving or starting a new business. You're talking about kind of very simple, practical things. So I guess the unreserved openness is, so you mentioned it's this idea of being comfortable in the uncertainty, being comfortable in kind of the challenge and not knowing what's going to be next. But obviously saying that is a lot easier than actually being comfortable in that uncertainty. So how do you get comfortable in that? Because even for me, right, and I'm sure you're probably in this boat too, especially when you work for yourself, there's a lot of uncomfort. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of, like, I remember, for example, during the pandemic, a lot of what I do is speaking. And so during the pandemic, I freaked out, right? Because my wife and I were both speakers. The pandemic was happening. Events were getting canceled left and right. And my wife and I were sitting there thinking, oh my God, like nobody's going to hire us to speak at an event ever again. There goes our revenue. Like that's game over. And then we saw this creation of this big push towards virtual events. And then it was this, we were so worried about and so scared about the uncertainty that we kind of didn't see this other opportunity that was coming up in the form of virtual events. So, but again, it's still a very tense and uncomfortable feeling, whether you work for yourself, whether you have a full-time job. So how do you get comfortable with the uncomfortable?
Yes, it's about training your mind. And you mentioned something interesting. I shared simple practices that everybody can try, right? A new route to work, or try unfamiliar food, or start a conversation with someone new. Those are very simple, easy things that allow you to train yourself in becoming familiar with the unfamiliar and the uncertainty. What I want to do is I want to help people to really train themselves, right, in these things, because eventually bigger things will happen, as you
Yeah.
said, right? There will be, a pandemic. There will be like changes in your life, in your relationship. There will be changes in your work. All of those changes will happen. There will be changes in your health as well as we grow older. So what you can do is you can prepare yourself by really practicing those small shifts. When you say, hey, I can choose to go to a restaurant once a week, right? But how often do we go to a different restaurant, right? Most people go to the same restaurant over and over again, order the same food, sit at the same place, have the same conversations with the same people, and so forth.
Yep.
That's not preparing you for the uncertainty or the difference that's going to happen in your future. You need to train yourself to really become familiar with that unfamiliar territory. And by doing that, you will show up then in the next pandemic, or whatever is going to happen, or the next change in your life, or the next relationship, being prepared. What means that you're going to see that opportunity, as you described, from doing speaking, in person to doing speaking virtually. You can then see that opportunity more quickly because you were prepared for that.
Mm.
And so that's something you can practice and train yourself in. And I think that's what we all need to do more of.
Yeah, whenever I interview a lot of CEOs on this podcast and ask them what helped you become successful, they always say, we did the uncomfortable jobs that everybody else was scared to do. We raised our hands and volunteered for all the hard things that other people kind of shied away from. So there's definitely something to that. And even from personal experience, I know that my wife and I are big fans of trying new restaurants. We have lists that we keep. We're always trying new restaurants. But even I saw this firsthand even with my wife, because my wife and I, we both like to eat a little bit earlier. We try to be healthy. We try to, not go crazy during the weekends. But when we moved from the Bay Area to Los Angeles, we were trying to make new friends. And, a lot of the friends here that we made, they oftentimes like to go to dinners a little bit later than what we would go out. Like we would go dinner, I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock. Friends would go to dinner at 7:30, 8, 8:30. And for a while, we were just kind of like, no, that's too late for us. We don't want to do that. And then after a while, we started saying yes to this. And I noticed, especially with my wife, as soon as she started saying yes to these uncomfortable opportunities that made her feel so uncomfortable, her friend circle grew massively. And now she's spending more time with friends. She's happier. She's even going out later this evening on a weekday, going to dinner at 7:30. And so when she pushes herself out of her comfort zone and she does the things that she knows that she doesn't really like to do, whenever she gets home at the end of the day, I said, how was the night? And she's like, oh my God, I'm so glad I went. It was so nice. And it reminds me of that quote where it's about change. And I can't remember who said it, but the quote was basically, everybody hates the journey to Disneyland, but everybody loves Disneyland when they get there. So in other words, the thought of getting in the car or getting on a plane and driving and getting dressed and putting on makeup in my wife's case and doing all that sort of stuff seems like such a pain. But then when you actually get there, you're like, oh, this is so much fun. I'm so glad I'm here. So it's kind of that mental block, to your point. Like we just think of all the bad things, but then when we do it, we're happy we did.
I love that. Yes, there's power in saying yes. And I actually wrote a whole chapter on that, because the yes will get you um, to something new, right? Something that you will enjoy. And what our mind does to ourselves is that it gives us all the arguments that you shared beautifully, right? Like why we shouldn't go to that dinner, right? Why we should stay at home, why we shouldn't go that late, why we shouldn't go with those new friends, and all of
Yep.
those things. All of those arguments show up because our mind will say, our brain will basically wants to save energy, right? And all of those things that we're doing that are new, that are different, that will um, um, that we need to show up openly to, those really activate our brain, and we need a lot of energy then, right, to embrace that unknown. But that's where we need exactly to go, right? And we need to say yes more, and we need to be open to those new opportunities, because then when bigger things are going to happen, right, you're going to be prepared. So think
Mm.
back in like November 2022 when ChatGPT arrived, right, on your phone or on your computer, whatever it is, right? How did you react, right, to that change? Were you a person saying like, yes, great, that's a fantastic opportunity? Did you see possibilities immediately? That's a question you can ask yourself. Or when the pandemic hit in 2020, March 16th, right? Were you the person said like, great, now I always wanted to explore like homeschooling for my kids, and I wanted to do work differently, right? I wanted to do virtual keynotes, whatever it is. Ask yourself honestly. And in both situations, I responded in a way that I saw immediately possibilities and opportunities, because that's how you can train yourself for the future that's going to be very different.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. All right. We have time for one, maybe two more if we go quickly. But compulsive curiosity is one that I also love. And I love that you don't just call them by their names of like optimism, openness, curiosity. There's always these adjectives at the front of them, which kind of make it like you have to do it even more than what you usually think. So, compulsive curiosity, what is that about? Why is that so important?
Um, for me, curiosity isn't just about finding answers, right? It's about staying open to what we don't yet know. And so curiosity really means asking what else, what if, what's next, even when we feel uncertain. And so at Google back in the days, I think someone asked, what if we could search the entire internet in zero point 0.2 seconds? And that impossible sounding question back then sparked a revolution, because that was really the big question that people were asking and trying to find an answer towards.
Hmm.
And so what I really allow people to do, or not allow people to, what I want people try out is that compulsive element, which
Yeah.
there is a powerful practice that you probably are familiar with. That's the 5 why method, right?
Oh, ask why
And
five
so
times in a row and see.
exactly. And why ask 5 times in a row? It's to unlock deeper insights behind challenges, right? And so if you ask 5 times why, it really allows you to show up with compulsive curiosity,
Yeah.
because then you really go deeper on an issue or a challenge or a problem that you want to create insights about. And so that's a powerful practice to really show your curiosity as a leader or a
Hmm.
person. And I'm always inspired by my children and by children in general, because they really live a life driven by curiosity, right? They go out and just wonder. They wonder about, why is it that way? Why can't it be different, right? Why are things the way they are, and why can't it be better?
Yep.
And so those are great questions that really allow you to follow your curiosity. And for me, the best leaders in the world are the leaders that ask the best questions. And so that is something we can also train and practice and become better at.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Google time. I remember, and I can't remember when Google stopped doing this, but there used to be a time when you would search on Google and it would actually tell you how long it took to bring back the search results. I don't remember when they stopped doing that, but I remember, yeah, it used to say like 0.00 whatever 2 seconds or something like that, and you get these crazy numbers all the time. And now we don't even think about how quickly these tools are able to do stuff like that. And the curiosity, I think, is so important, especially when we think about something like ChatGPT, because it has so much potential impact in so many different areas of our lives that if you kind of just turn your back towards it, that one day you're going to turn towards it and it's going to be a different world that you're a part of. So it's completely changed. I mean, I use ChatGPT pretty much every day. My team uses ChatGPT. It's helpful in so many amazing ways. And of course, we have Perplexity.ai as well, which is doing some cool stuff. So if you were to think about how to practice curiosity, because part of it means you need to have time to be curious. So for people who are listening and watching this, who are thinking, I have a full-time job. I barely have time to go to the gym at the end of the day. I don't have time to be curious. How do you instill or practice curiosity for somebody who might say, well, Frederik, it sounds great. I just don't have the time.
Yes, it's time is always a great excuse, right? And
Yes.
we haven't invented the time machine yet, I think, because I feel like it will maybe solve or not solve so many issues or arguments why we always blame like time to not do something, right? But if you look at the benefits of curiosity, right, and just look at kids and how they use their curiosity, it's really interesting because kids are learning really incredibly fast, right,
Yeah.
about anything in the world. And that curiosity about anything in the world is really something powerful. And if we go back in time to the 15, 16, and 1700s, if you looked at maps back then, right, maps had an interesting feature, and that was they had monsters on the edges, right? Those monsters signaled to everyone, don't go to the edge of what's known,
Yeah.
right, in our world, because you might fall off the planet Earth, right? That was still the knowledge back then. But some sailors, they took their curiosity and combined that with courage, right? And sailed to the end of the world to literally see, like, if there are these monsters. And none of these monsters were existing. But what they found was basically something that is now the new world, or is a new understanding of planet Earth, right? For once, that is round and it's not just it's not a surface that you can fall off from.
Hmm.
So that curiosity really led to some really, really new and interesting discoveries. And so if you look into our world, right, we also see monsters and scary things that signal to us like, don't go there, right? Don't use those technologies or don't use that or whatever it is. But if you allow your curiosity, as you described, to really be an explorer and try to learn something new, I think there's a tremendous benefit that you will have as an individual, but also as a leader, to be the first one that maybe explains to the world something that you found by following your curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be so simple too. It could be just a couple minutes a day, listen to a podcast about something new, watch a video about something new, have a conversation. Like I have two kids, a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and it's just so amazing to see how curious they are. My 4-year-old son, especially, like his favorite activity is to go to Home Depot, and he'll just walk around. What's that? What's that? How does that work? What's in there? And
Incredible.
yeah,
Yes.
he's taking apart my flashlights. He's plugging things into outlets. He's just nonstop bombarding me with just so curious how their little minds and brains work. And so many of us, when we show up to work each day, that curiosity just kind of, do your task, be quiet, don't ask any questions, it disappears. So it really is like a muscle that we need to train. And if you forget to train it, you kind of then, become a cog in the machine, which I don't think anybody wants to be.
Yes. So now I'm jealous about your two mentors that you have, or coaches, that really, with 4 and 8-year-olds, show you how to also be more curious as an adult,
Yeah.
right? And so I think when we grow up, we just lose that curiosity. We don't ask those questions anymore. And I think we need to, watch kids more and observe how kids are exploring the world and what questions they ask, because that's very powerful. And there's so much learning that we can gain from that as well.
Not only that, but a lot of companies will punish you for asking questions now, right? It's not just we don't encourage it, but we punish you for speaking out of turn, which is, a completely wrong approach to have. Well, there are three others that people are going to have to grab your book and connect with your content to get, and that is Perpetual Experimentation, Expansive Empathy, and Dimension X. But before we wrap up, any last, I guess, pieces of advice for people who want to drive innovation or creativity inside their organizations? Obviously, they can grab your book, connect with you. But are there any good starting points or places that you usually recommend?
Yes, I think for me, when you ask yourself that question, how can, I be more innovative, or how can my organization or my team be more innovative? I think it always comes back to these deeply human qualities that we talked about, right? Don't start with like, oh, where can I put my money first? Or like, how can we create an idea board that we talked about, or other things. I think focus on these deeply human qualities, being more curious, being more optimistic, more open, experiment more, and show more empathy, because that's the best starting point for yourself to be more innovative and to create the future that you want to see happening. And all of those things we can train ourselves in, right? By doing exercises and practices that really allow us to be more optimistic, and not just be optimistic, but be radically optimistic, or be unreserved open, or compulsive curious. And so it's really fascinating how these practices make a difference in your life, and that will lead to more innovation for yourself, but also will lead to more innovation in your organization too.
I love it. Perfect way to wrap up. Where can people go to learn more about you, grab your book, anything else you want to mention for people to check out?
Yes. There is a great way to connect with me. I write a newsletter called Next Letter, which is really your personal one-to-one with your future. So it's your personal time with your future, where I ask one question, I give you two perspectives, and I give you one experiment to try for the week. So you can find that at Next Letter, and with my name, Frederik Pferdt. And hope you subscribe and get your personal one-to-one with your future next time.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm going to have to check that out as well. I didn't even know that existed. And then the book is called What's Next Is Now. I had a chance to read a copy, available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Frederik, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jacob, for having me.
And thanks everyone for tuning in. I will see all of you next week. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. If you want to get access to more content on how you can become future ready, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. It's thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you next time.